After that, I may have to take the hat off so I can think. So they asked me for my title first, and I'll tell you the story about this, but I'm going to lead you through a pathway that began actually a year ago. And right after this, where's Chandy? Is Chandy here? Raise your hand. Hi, Chandy. So you're going to get interviewed, and they're going to ask you questions. The question they asked me, what's going to happen next year? I'm going, I don't know. Tropical diseases, infectious, there's going to be epidemics. There will be epidemics. I said, I don't know where. Flu people live in deadly fear that it'll be flu every year, right? Could be Ebola again. We're heading to New Orleans. I said, we don't know where it hits, and we may not be paying attention to them because they're far away, they get lost on some website, but there will be epidemics. That's a reality. I also ran into some other issues later that day, and that's basically what we worked on all year. One of those was, of course, the transition to being an independent society without a management firm and moving the office to DC. So I knew walking out of that meeting that that would be a big amount of the work that we would be doing. This case for concerted action is actually part of that. I'll come back to that, and then I'll explain the grapes. I don't think there's any grapes around, but... So I didn't know, Dan, that you would be putting epidemics as a theme for this meeting. But I wanted to start there because knowing that Alan McGill had dealt with all of the issues with Ebola and the management by the state and the fear that was going on at that time at a public health level, at a personal level. But then tracking what are the epidemics that have had far-reaching effect already at a national and multinational level. This is only 2018. The century is young, and it's already been ongoing. I highlighted the 2013 going on Ebola West Africa because that was what we were dealing with when the decision was being made whether this meeting was canceled or not. But many of these other are serious, and I have numbers of deaths and cases for all of them, too much information. This is serious. And the Ebola ongoing epidemic in DRC right now has confirmed cases, confirmed deaths, and if you look at that epi curve, so how does this work? Here, except only I see it then. This is not done yet. And there may be some people in the room that have contributed, I know Dan has, to the preparations, the response. But what has happened this time is actually notable in its silence. We know about it, track it in the news, but I don't see the fear. I know that there are teams on the ground, that WHO sent teams, there are preparations for working up the epidemic, there were mobile units that were there. We became smarter. WHO became prepared. A vaccine was maybe not enough, but a vaccine development process was moved forward. And that's only been 4 to 5 years. We were able to respond. So clearly, learning continues. And in that context of what I could predict with my crystal ball, whether I wear the hat or not, there now are models that aim to predict mobility under epidemic situations. This is one that was based on the H1N1 influenza vaccine, and what this paper did was try to say if there was a case of an influenza variant of importance in Hanoi, how can we predict where that virus would go and how rapidly? It's actually rather scary how rapidly, and of course, everyone knows that modeling with flu is fraught with danger, but it begins to tell you the kind of thought power that has been put and is being put in building the tools to try to do a better job. Now I want to take us back to a couple, well, let me transition it. So those are epidemics. We're scared of epidemics. We respond in 5 years. We make amazing things happen. Mobilize resources, maybe take the money away later on if we're not scared anymore. But amazing things happened that prepared us for a much better response in DRC. There are old epidemics for which there was equal fear and there was a response. And this was a very different approach at the time. Polio, I chose 1954 because this is before the availability of vaccine. It was the year I was born, so I always remember that polio vaccine was not available. The Salk inactivated vaccine trials ended in 1955, and vaccine immunization was launched immediately afterwards. And the oral polio vaccine trials finished in 1959, and that's been the vaccine that has largely taken us through control. And after much argument with these two giants in vaccinology that I never had the pleasure of meeting. And so let's skip about 30 years worth of work with a global immunization program and routine immunization. And of course, this is now, since 1988, a targeted priority vaccine polio eradication program based on vaccine, passed at the World Health Assembly in 1988. And in the first decade, they decreased cases by 99%. That's good, right? 10 years, 99%. You've got that 1% left. It's that tail. It's that tail. And what you're seeing here, and this is through, oops, sorry. What did I do wrong? Okay. Oh, there it is. This is through 2017. So I was able to find the update. Over the past 8 years, it's gone from 600 cases reported. And remember polio, I mean, it's a virus, so we don't talk about it at this meeting, right? But it affects our target populations. We can't ignore it, and it is a global health priority. 600 cases. In 2017, 22 cases. And these are wild type. Remember that in polio, you have to deal with two sources of vaccine, one being wild type and the other was vaccine derived. But now it's actually plateauing and continuing to percolate, and it's costing us in opportunity costs and somebody else who's actually paying the bill about $1.5 billion a year to sustain this program. So this is something that very much needs to end, that people want to end. And we have to remind ourselves, what have they done to be successful? And from the malaria point of view, it's simple. There's no vector. There's no treatment. It's just a vaccine. Distribute the vaccine, you're done, right? But that means that the polio tactics include not only OPV, which generated herd immunity, the addition of IPV more recently to prevent disease. Hopefully in 2 years, OPV that does not revert to neurovirulence. I've been told it's about 2 years away. We'll see. Surveillance, and we had that great session at the Alan McGill Symposium on variety of approaches to respond, to measure, and to think about surveillance. But they have excelled at using genetic tools to inform what they needed to know, which is it vaccine derived or is it wild type? They have done environmental surveillance. I can't even begin to think how they've done that. They have shared data. They have pooled and shared data with urgency because it was needed. There's mapping tools and management tools that were created. But most interestingly, and a little bit jealously, I look at their framing out very early on and actually keeping it increasingly robust of a targeted research program that would meet with the global program, and they would say, this is what we need. And they'd go off and bring back a budget on what it would take to solve that problem. We need monovalent oral polio. We need surveillance here. We need a better tool to do that. We need a database. And they'd go and they'd solve that problem. So there's also a headquarters-based effort. But what I found out is that most of the staff are not sitting in Geneva. They're distributed, helping the country. So that's one model for getting things done. And it has been amazingly successful. This is up through October 16th of 2018. And it shows, let me see if I can do that. Yes. So all of these cases, whether they're either yellow, green, blue, are vaccine-derived polio outbreaks. And the places where we have ongoing transmission, Afghanistan and Pakistan. This is a little outbreak of the vaccine-derived polio one. And this is how they're indeed tracking. That's what we just looked at. There we are. So the cases that remain are coming out of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And if you remember your basic polio, that for every case you probably have 100 infected individuals, and that's why they can pick it up out of environmental sampling. So 21 cases of wild type and many more that I didn't try to catch up with that are vaccine derived. And although Nigeria has been clear, for instance, 2014, for some reason they're still labeling it as endemic, and it may be because there are environmental samples that are positive, even though there are no cases. So this is a great success. That long tail is creating, and they're tracking it weekly. It is available. It was a little harder to find. But they know exactly where it's coming from. There's relatively good speed at identifying the virus and responding. We think we understand surveillance response. They do respond because it's so late that they circle the cases in a very serious manner. And then comparing, are we doing better this year than last year? This is now a rare event. So having 17 cases versus 21 cases, you cannot compare. We haven't taken care of the problem. And they will be dealing with that tail, and there is great urgency from the public health perspective to get the job done and go on and do maybe something else, or at least rest. Now, the second example, this is another major program that's going on, is very different. It's a worm. It's slow. It's not a fast virus that one needs to fear. It enters humans via drinking, bathing water, children playing in ponds, migrates to the surface of the skin to release larvae and exits, and that's where it burns, it itches, and you really want to put your legs, which is where usually infection is, exiting from, in water. And when you put it in water, release into the next generation. So that's the basic cycle. And at the end of a year, the worm is gone, and you're not protected, you're not immune, you're at risk again. And it's a matter of identifying those cases. So this started, and I went back, and the original case to be made was a letter, I think, in the Lancet by Don Hopkins and colleagues. And 6 years later, magic happened, and WHO declared this a priority and an eradication initiative. The case was made on the basis of elimination having taken place in some countries, and the limited reproductive cycle, and then the thought that they had the tools in hand. And actually, it's a really great public health package. Treatment of water with a bait, which deals with the infection in the water. Very active surveillance. At this point, they're paying for cases. And I'll tell you the new cases they're paying for. Containment, which means is identifying the case and making sure they're not going back into the water, and care for making sure the worms fully come out. And then these great filters and screens that have changed technologies over time. I think I actually have one of the ones that you hang around your neck, and I'll show you where I got that. So here's the curve for that. It took more than 10 years to drop down to very, very few cases, but again, you can see that for the past 10 years, we've been struggling. And some of it is actually so sad it's funny. An infected individual walked across several countries and to visit family and rested his legs in water because they were bothering him, and managed to reintroduce it to a number of areas. But the latest then is more concerning. Right now, 2 countries are reporting cases, but there's 29 villages, and the way they track it is, are they contained Was that individual ever back in touch with water? Are they not contained? I had the fortune to visit Ghana when it was still having cases in 2007, and was able to see the treatment, the water management, which is a way of not having to get in near the water, but still be able to have access to drinking water. And to talk to the staff, very committed staff. Primarily the ones that I met coming from the Carter Center, but really in partnership with WHO. And now there are 19 indigenous cases in 3 countries. Apparently there's been 1 reported in Angola. And the certification status, and this is fresh off the press from the Carter Center, so I assume that it's the most current, is that there are 3 countries that, let's see, the yellow are the certified, the red striped are endemic, and the red are in the process of certification. So quite advanced. Julie, I don't know when the next prediction is, and the reality has been, the prediction was that it would be done in 1995, then 2000, then 2010, and it is that tail that costs a lot, that is really hard to maintain energy and optimism because it's hard, and you're dealing with the last cases. So I can't do this without talking a little bit about malaria, but it's going to be really a high level. And I guess Rick told part of the story, but it is, again, a question of where we as a community, and not saying we, the people in this room, I'm talking about the affected countries, the WHO, the funders, all of the pieces that need to be together to work, to make the agreement, to take concerted action. And what's so interesting about malaria is that to even control malaria requires an enormous effort. I first met Rick Steckety like the week I started at the Gates Foundation because there was a big initiative to drive and control what had been rampaging, increasing rates of malaria and malaria deaths, particularly in Africa. And I needed help. And David Brantley Bennett introduced me to Rick and to Kent Campbell. And for the next 9 months or so, we met regularly, coming in from CDC and from UNICEF, to think through how to rationalize where to focus, what we were going to achieve, how that was going to establish an advocacy database that said, if you do this, in this rate, in this fashion, it will work and it will save lives. And if we could figure out what that package looked like. Why was it so hard to think of it? There was a hypothesis at the time, and I went, and I won't say where it was coming from, but it was commonly held that you needed to build markets, and you needed to get people to commit to their own health and buy their own bed nets, which is not entirely a bad thing, but I'm coming from a vaccine background, right? So I'm looking, getting people who have no money to pay for prevention, that's really hard. We don't do that with vaccines. We have Gavi. Why would you expect people to do that with bed nets? So they looked at me like I was not being very polite, but I was honestly a bit perplexed. And what we came up with is actually it's the opposite. We didn't even talk that much about resistance. A great way of generating resistance is to dribble a little bit of whatever it is you're going to develop resistance to. And this original drawing was on a napkin in the coffee shop, but it became the conceptual framework for the first phase of the program in partnership with Zambia, which was to rapid scale up to above 80%, and that would result in a rapid drop in incidence and prevalence. And you began seeing a change in numbers in Africa and data emerging, and people are looking and making their own decisions. We're 5 years into the program, and we had this meeting called Malaria Forum. And this is where, let me remind you, Melinda spoke. And I'm saying it's audacious not only because they were saying the word eradication, which was not said in polite malaria society at that point. It horrified David Brandley Bennett and the team because it had failed before. And it had discouraged the young investigators from keeping working on malaria, so we had lost a generation of people with expertise. The systems to develop vector tools had disappeared or had fragmented and had not been replaced by the next generation. And it caused that decade of chaos with increasing cases. So that if we didn't have a plan, we shouldn't be talking about eradication. And the problem was, if you couldn't talk about eradication, how were you going to focus R&D efforts for drugs or vaccines or strategies to put that all together to achieve it? It wasn't going to happen by mistake. So what they talked about was the goal. They didn't say, we decide to do it. They didn't say, you, WHO, must do it. What Melinda made was an ethics-based case that said, if it was in our neighborhood and our children were dying, this is what we would want to achieve. As a matter of fact, we did. So why would that not be the goal, the strategic goal for the world, even if it takes us a while to build those tools that you say that are missing, and that the status quo is unacceptable? It is sort of a emperor has no clothes kind of moment. The other piece that I'm not talking about here is that there was a fairly good assessment, not modeling level, but a fairly good assessment at what it would cost to continue control forever. And it was more than a third of overseas development assistance at that time for everything. So that malaria would take 1/3, thank you very much, to maintain control. Not even include, well, it included the research base that you would need to replace the drugs. And no one thought that that was sustainable. So when we talked about that, they said, well, what's our exit strategy for the world, for the strategy? And I said, we've got to say the E word. And that became this photograph at the Malaria Forum. Now, what happened during that time with the scale up based on MASEPA and many others, then really pushing, and the Global Fund as a critical ingredient, providing the resources for the commodities, RDTs. I mean, when I first started, they were dipping bed nets, sorry. They were dipping bed nets every 6 months, right? The LLINs were just coming on board. People were talking about microscopy. We didn't have a vaccine. That's what I was working on. And there was a huge fight in the literature about WHO killing babies because the transition hadn't been made to ACTs and they were concerned about resistance. Very rapidly, all that changed, and the package we're using today has been used since about 2003 or so, with slower uptake of RDTs, but pretty rapid of LLINs with a lot of effort, because if you could design a technology that would be on the surface package that you'd have to hang every night, you'd have to sleep in, that would be stifling hot, that would have to be replaced, and then someone tell you, according to the way people think about today, that's a scalable technology, you'd say you're crazy. But when you're desperate and you have a technology that works, you may figure out how to make it work. So this is from the Malaria Atlas Project, and it compares parasite prevalence from 2000 to 2015. The Malaria Forum was somewhere in the middle. And it shows that things did get better. There was significant scale up, even the change was probably most impactful in highest hit areas because they had so much more highly endemic. On the other hand, in other areas, and this is Sri Lanka, but there are other countries, there were countries were quietly getting certified or requesting certification. And this sort of unpackages, they have it, they don't have it, into the pain of what it took over a 30-year period. They came very close, of course, to getting down to about 18 or 19 cases. Stopped the program, it was not a national priority. And you can see that the outbreaks came back again, particularly when they had a 30-year-long conflict. But they have actually now no cases since 2012, and certification took place in 2016. And what WHO predicted a couple years ago was that there were at that point 21 countries that at least had the potential and had committed to eliminating malaria by 2020. What we've discovered since then, and now the WHO is bringing the community together, they're sharing lessons learned, they're sharing what the problems are, and they're finding, as one would expect, that probably about half of them may achieve that. And this is 2018, so that would be awesome. And it is definite progress on the elimination side. Much of that is being driven by something, I actually don't know what to put on the bottom of this anymore, and I'm not sure if it's the very latest one that is a WHO graphic. But I use it because, although not in color, it actually shows what was the current hypothesis about 3 years ago. And that's how we need to treat it. The hypothesis was, A, was scaling up for impact, that graphic that you saw at the very beginning. B was we need information systems, and now it almost extends all the way to the left, because if you can't measure it and you can't report it, what are you really doing, right? So you need to build that in very early. C was the innovation, the thought that mass drug administration with antimalarials to clear the reservoir would be a critical accelerator or could actually help achieve elimination. D was getting it down to the individual level and responding in some way. And then E was that last long tail of tracking the cases and treatment and continuing to do surveillance post-elimination. So the WHO held an ERG 2 months ago on MDA and the role it could play. I haven't seen the final report. I think we're all interested. But I think that's likely to have some role, but not what was originally envisioned as the role in clearing and taking us all the way to zero. That step to zero is very challenging. And so the reason I spoke about it, this World Malaria Report 2017, was a bit of a surprise, although it shouldn't have been if you were following the trends. And what it showed was this. 2016, remember 2017 report is 2016 data, that we were kind of back where we were in 2012. And the deaths are a little out of sync, but that. And there's been a lot of questions about what this reflects, what is failing. It is very clear that it's not just one country. But then you look at where this data is coming from. And what's happened in malaria is we can't compare this really well to what happened in the year 2000 because we weren't using RDTs then. And a lot of the key countries had their data modeled in from smaller studies or from neighboring countries. And now many of the countries, including Nigeria and DRC, are using RDTs, are reporting data. So you're comparing two entirely different data systems. But that the countries are showing a trend to having more cases. And the first set of threats to think about, of course, is insecticide resistance, the difference potentially of seeing what was seen in Peru with parasite gene deletions, which are the target of the rapid diagnostic test. And of course, the concern always of resistance to whatever drug, which is clearly an issue in the GMS, but has not been documented, as far as I know, in Africa, unless it happened at this meeting and I've missed it. At the same time, this is investments in malaria control and elimination by who the funder were. And the big picture here is really simple. It doesn't matter what the color is. It's a flat line. It's a flat line. And that flat line is challenged by two things. Populations are increasing, and the shift to actyllic, or not, it's not actylic's fault, the shift to more expensive interventions because of concern of resistance means that fewer people are covered by IRS. So that's been a problem. And while there's been this updated research agendas in parallel to learning and how to keep our eye on what's happening at the research base, we need to be realistic about where we are. Countries are eliminating with existing tools and strategies, but there are a significant number of deaths and cases, and we need to look at the 2018 report. In reality, malaria responds exquisitely rapidly to scale up, but it returns when the pressure is taken off. We have serious gaps and challenges, and my message there is the same as polio. It's no surprise. We need innovation. We need the next generation, both in the field and in the bench. And that's probably true of any of these initiatives. Now, managing the tail, smallpox. They started and they finished in 10 years. Polio. 2 of the 3 strains are eradicated, but we've gone over where the problems are. Guinea worm, launched in 1981 and now dealing with infection in the animals. And malaria, we're still evolving that strategy, but advancing the control agenda. And I think control to high transmission areas is now a gradient. And it's not that you're in elimination phase and you're in control phase, but that evolution of strategy depends on persistence and stubbornness, leadership, funding, and probably innovation to the end. Now let me do that dramatic step function change, which is we face problems that we are comfortable with. Epidemics, the ongoing acute epidemics, the ongoing chronic epidemics, which all these diseases are calling themselves. I guess they're right, millions of cases. But we're facing at the same time epidemics of ideas. Let me give you a couple of cases, because this is also something that we as a community and perhaps a society, we take on. Let me give you examples. Sheer fraud. Measles and autism. Who's our champion there? I'm not sure he's in the room, but Peter Hotez. The book, Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism. And the problem is that epidemiology is really bad at proving the negative. We can say with a certain confidence that something doesn't occur, but that community is desperate for solutions. And the real problem is that the defrocked physician that started this with flawed data is now living in Texas in his backyard. So there's a very strong anti-vaccine community there. Fears and political risks. I sent Stephanie James a note and asked her, who's taking this on? Because the fear of GMO, in spite of having a lot of malaria and deaths from malaria, is stopping or making real problems in testing these interventions. So I put Stephanie James because she's in charge of bringing that community together. But of course, there's investigators and champions and countries as part of it. And it's going to take all of those voices to be able to figure out the path forward. Polio vaccine and reproductive rights. There are more. I actually was looking to figure out how many, and I think we're losing count. More than 100 vaccinators have been killed. That's bad enough. But those women continue going into the household and vaccinating even today. And to do that in the context of knowing you have a potential risk of getting killed for doing your job and trying to save lives is it's just something that isn't talked about enough. The misperceptions, it's not only what you know that's not true, it's the assumptions that the community makes that makes our job in communicating what's possible in global health hard. There is a certain amount of the US population, I learned this from Karen in the advocacy workshop, that believes that global health receives 25% of the US budget. They truly believe this. So if you're talking about where to cut, given the fact that we have funding restraints, et cetera, wouldn't you want to cut the global health budget? And a commitment to the global fund and to a commitment to research. So it's very hard to have those discussions when you're dealing with flawed premises. And the other is blatant malfeasance. And the champion here is someone who I've never met, I don't think he's in the room, Paul Newton, but he wrote this paper, Murder by Fake Drugs. Because there are companies that are making drugs that are so flawed that may have a tiny bit enough of the critical ingredient to test positive, but not enough to treat. And people are dying. And you've got to stand up and call it what it is and challenge the countries to figure out how to regulate and do the right thing. So there are times for concerted action, and I've shown you 3 different times. The epidemics. We couldn't have responded to Ebola that's going on today if a whole lot of action from members of this community, from the funding agencies, from WHO, from the countries to prepare. And it's not just Ebola. For all I know, flu is brewing right now. I have enough flu friends that I live in constant fear of that. Please get your flu vaccine. But you know, if it's a new strain, then we don't even have that vaccine for another X number of months. The issue of concerted action was late conversation with Pedro Alonso. And he said, in Spain, and it's the same thing in Peru. So it's something in the south, this thing that in New Year's Eve at midnight, you eat a grape with every chime of the 12-hour bells, and you do that for good luck. So, when the ball's dropping, etc. And he said, but everybody does it. And he said, wouldn't it be great if their 13th grape was whatever we cared about, your anti-malarial pill? Whatever we agreed as a community was the thing that we would take because it was important enough. Now, some of them may be things like acute epidemics, a way of responding, finding that contact point that brings the community together. Other things could be things like malaria. But when you're dealing with the issues of misinformation, it may be you sending a letter or speaking up at a conference or writing the critical paper on your own. But other times, you can benefit from linking up to the people in this room, to the society, to people in whatever discipline you are, because concerted action can be heard better. And so we have to figure out how to be brave like those vaccinators. I cannot imagine that, right? That's their job. How to be evidence-based, having the data to make the right decisions, and saying when we don't. That's actually saying when we don't. That's even more critical, or what tools need to be built. And then at times, like Peter, and I don't know, Stephanie, if you're getting criticized or attacked, but they don't know that you're probably doing what you're doing, is the GMO stuff in Europe is, I went shopping because they lost my suitcase. And the big deal is that everything you buy is organic cotton so that it touches your skin without GMO. That's the selling point at the shops in Hamburg, Germany. That was terrifying to me because they thought that people cared enough that they would pay more because it was GMO cotton-free. A little scary. The decision on where you speak up is up to you. And it's not about being noisy, it's not about writing letters every time, but it is identifying that point where you are compelled to speak up because it is the right thing to do. And know that it relates to global health, not to politics. We are apolitical, is that the right word? We are nonpartisan. When Karen takes the council and people on the Hill, she's taught me to talk to both Republicans and Democrats about what aspects they could care about global health. And that's what we need to do to be effective. But regardless, we have an agenda of prioritizing this and informing people so they can make their decisions, depending on who you're talking to, in the context of the real data and the real impact of those decisions. So I think this is a time of change for the organization. We are an organization. We have a board. It's not a governing council that comes and gives counsel. We have fiduciary responsibility for the society. And Karen actually, as the CEO, has to guide the organization in meeting its goals. And of course, there's scientific, there's the meetings, there's the committees, there's recommendations and guidelines. There's many ways that we have impact. But at times, it will be voice. I was quite disappointed because she sent everyone apparently to sing. There's this issue. touch this button. The letter will tell you, based on your zip code, if you're American. If you're not, you're probably not receiving it. Who your representatives are. Here's the draft letter. Edit it to your heart's content, to whatever you care about. Speak on this issue. Press the button and send. I'm a very fast reader, so I actually made some changes and sent it. Do you know what percentage of the society responded to that? On something that was actually kind of a burning issue, about 3%. So you choose to vote or not vote. You choose to speak or not speak. You choose to engage or not engage. It is your choice. But I do think that having a society which lays out goals and opportunities for engagement is a really good place to be. So thank you very much. It's been a great year, and it's really forced me to be more thoughtful about what activities I take on and to figure out when we need to be really brave. Thanks.
Thank you.